This presentation, titled How Effective Are Your Product Recall Procedures, comes to us from Daniel McConville. Daniel has more than 35 years of experience in the food and occupational health and safety, OH&S industries. In his career, he's delivered health, safety, food safety, and quality-based services to a range of industries and events, including the Taipei Summer Universidad 2017, the ADF, universities and colleges, hospitality and food manufacturing, health and aged care, local government, facilities management, and contractor management. And with that, take it away, Daniel.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. So, welcome to the webinar on how effective are your product recall procedures. So let's have a look at it to be covered in today's session. And I'm going to have a look at what is a product recall. We'll also talk about the types of recalls. So there are a number of recalls in there, different types of recalls. But I also want to have a look into the recall process, and more importantly, have a look at what your obligations are if you are required by law to recall a product for health and safety reasons. So I'll start off having a look, as I said, at what is a product recall. Then I'll explain why food is recalled and whether or not I actually have a legal requirement to have a recall procedure. Then following that, we can have a look at, once we've gone through what our recall plan is or a recall procedure is, then we can have a look at the process for testing your recall procedure. And this is going to be most important because it's one thing to have a good plan in place, but it's another thing to make sure that it actually works. And then I'll tie into actually how to recall food products and then finish off with traceability. So those last three are going to be one of the three key things that will go through the presentation. But first, let's start this presentation by looking at what is a food recall. And as the first point in the slide says, a food recall is an action taken to remove from distribution, sale, and consumption food which is unsafe. Now, I've taken this definition from Food Standards Australia. So here in Australia, we have the Food Standards Australia, New Zealand. Food Standards Code has come out of their industry protocol. And really, the main focus of a food recall is to ensure that food has been quarantined and that we can remove any effective products from shelves so that people don't get sick or, worst case, some people may die from food poisoning. Now, also, as I go through this presentation, I might use the word food recall or product recall. They are the exact same thing. Okay, so food recall and a product recall are exactly the same. But what is different is a food recall and a food withdrawal, or a product recall and a product withdrawal. So from time to time, you might have heard the term product recall, product withdrawal, and wondered what the difference is. And yes, there is a difference between a product recall and a product withdrawal. So a product recall or a food recall removes food, as I said, from distribution, sale, or consumption because it presents a significant safety risk or threat, and the product could be defective or it could actually be contaminated. Now, your food recall is either going to be at a trade level or a consumer level. So it's called a trade level recall or consumer recall, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But an example of a food recall could be where we have an unknown allergen in a product and we haven't identified this on the label. So that product then would need to be recalled. A product withdrawal, so that is where the product has been removed from the supply chain, but it hasn't been removed for health and safety reasons. So we see this where there could be a wrong weight on the packaging, or the manufacturer may just want to withdraw the product for quality reasons. So it may be the right colour, it may not be the right texture, but the product is certainly not harmful in a product withdrawal, whereas a food recall, the product is harmful and it does need to be recalled from the supply chain. Okay, so commonly there are two types of food recall. One is a level recall and one is a consumer level recall. Now I know that I do have there also a mandatory recall. However, these really aren't as common as what they used to be, and I'll talk about that just at the end of this slide. But depending on the extent of distribution of the food product, the recall initiated by the organisation will be one of these two levels. So it will either be a trade level recall or either be a consumer level recall. And the type of recall is going to depend on the type of product, where it's been sold, reason for that recall. So a trade level recall, that involves the recovery of product from distribution centres and wholesalers. So that could also include things like hospitals, restaurants, other major catering establishments, or any outlet that you might have supplied that product and they are going to sell that food, or where food has been manufactured for immediate consumption, or where food has been prepared on the premises. So any of those examples, and that food recall is going to be classified as a trade recall. Now with a consumer level, that is going to involve the recovery of product from all points in the production and distribution chain. And that includes any affected product that potentially could be in the possession of the consumer. So an example of this could be if the product has reached the shelves of a supermarket, then that is going to be a consumer recall, or even if consumers have purchased that product, it is going to be a consumer level recall. Now you might be wondering, well, yes, I run a food business. How am I going to know all of this information? How am I going to be involved with this information? Your local food authority should have a subscription service where you can be alerted to consumer recalls. And here in Australia, we do have, most of our local authorities do have that, but also Food Standards Australia also has that subscription service that you can sign up to, and that's a free service. So just on recalls, and I'll talk about this more in depth in the upcoming slides, but so far in Australia we've had 8 recalls for the month of February. We're only halfway through the month, and that is significantly higher than the average. And the last one there, mandatory recall. As I said, they're not really as common as what they used to be, but this is where the food authority might direct the manufacturer, the supplier, the importer, or someone to recall that food product. So why is food recalled? Generally, food gets recalled if it's contaminated, it might be suspected of being unfit for human consumption, or there could be something in there that doesn't meet a legislative standard, or it may not be compliant with a mandatory standard. And we'll generally get that information from manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers, or consumers. And sometimes the food business themselves may remove that product or recall that product for their own testing and auditing purposes. Now here in Australia, the information that we've got from Food Standards Australia says that over the last 10 years, so from January 2009 to December 2019, they've coordinated 675 recalls. So that is 67 half a year on average, which works out at about 5.5 per month. So on the previous slide, we've already had 8 for the month of February, and we're only halfway through the month. Now, why that food is being recalled, again, the stats will say that approximately 1/3 of food recalls are due to microbiological issues, a third result from incorrect labelling, and a third are due to physical or chemical contamination. And as much as 90% of labelling recalls are due to undeclared allergens. So that's where you might have included peanuts, eggs, gluten, milk, or something like that, soy, in the product, and you actually haven't put that information on the label. And it's interesting to note just on that with the 8 recalls that we've had so far in the month of February here in Australia, 6 of those have been allergen related. So as I said before, food is normally recalled, and we find out about that through some form of report or complaint, and that could be from manufacturers, retailers, consumers, or it could be from the organisation doing their own testing or auditing. Now, when we recall food, we classify that according to the problem. And again, this is really to help us determine where the trends are. So we break these into different classifications. The first one there, microbial, and that's where we might have contamination such as parasite or bacteria in the product, so then like to get recalled. The next one there, labelling, that could be where the product, the labelling is incorrect, so we don't have all the food ingredients on there, or we might have extra food ingredients on there that actually aren't in there. There could be incorrect date markings, or maybe the labelling's compliant. It doesn't comply with the labelling laws, so therefore it needs to be recalled. Foreign matter, or foreign items, we often refer to that. So it could be a piece of wood or plastic or glass or metal or something that could have come off a piece of machinery or something, and that is incorrect. The next one there, chemical or other contaminants, and the stats tell us that the 3 main substances that contaminate food are cleaning products, pesticides, and machine oil. So it is important to, as a manufacturer, so if you're in a food business and if you do have equipment and that equipment is being maintained, it's important that you ensure that the person undertaking the maintenance, whether that's one of your own personnel or whether that's a contractor, they are using a machine grade food oil. And also with your pesticides, you want to make sure that where they are located or stored, or you might have rat traps or other bait traps, that they can't come into contact with food items. The next one on the list there, undeclared allergens, and that could be due to incorrect labelling on the product. It could also be incorrect packaging. There could be contamination of the product. So you might have in there peanuts in there, and they actually shouldn't be in there. The next one, a packaging fault. So that could be where the packaging has resulted in some contamination. So maybe the seal on that packaging is not adequate. It's let air in and the product is now contaminated. And the last one there, biotoxins, and commonly we'll see that in fish. So it could be toxins in oysters, or there might be a high level of histamines in fish. So we just have a look at this chart here, and this is what I was talking about before. So this comes from 2009 through to 2019 in Australia, and it's looking at food recalls. So in 2009, we started off with 53 food recalls, and we finished off in 2019 with 87. But really, if you focus on the last 2 years, we've had 187 recalls, and the recalls, although we've had a drop from 2019 to 2018, it is still significantly higher, and it is trending in that way. So, and if you look at what's happened so far this year in Australia, we've already had 15 food recalls. So we're way above what the average is. Okay, so do I need to have a recall plan? And if you are engaged in the wholesale supply, manufacture or importation of food, then it is a legal requirement in Australia that you do have a food recall plan. Now, I've taken this slide from the Food Standards Code here in Australia, and this comes from Clause 12 of Standard 3.2.2, which is food safety practices and general requirements. And that states that a food business engaged in the wholesale supply, manufacture or importation of food must have in place a system to ensure the recall of unsafe food, set out this system in a written document and make this document available to an authorised officer on request, and comply with this system when recalling food. Now, just in that first line, the word must, that is pretty definitive. So we must have one, not we should have one, we could have one, we might get one next year. It means that we must have one. And then just with the third point there, complying with this system when recalling unsafe food, the only way you are going to know that you can comply with your system is if you know that your system works. And the only way you're going to know if your system works is if you have tested your system. I'll talk about that towards the end of the presentation, about testing your plan. Now, this slide here, I found this from the New South Wales Food Authority. It's a pretty good slide. It's on product recall and withdrawal process, so it's a really good flow chart. It talks about, at the top there, gives you the difference between a recall and withdrawal. It also talks about initial notification, and it says there a potential recall or withdrawal may be identified or advised through the actions of the following, and it has manufacturers, suppliers, retailers, third-party or second-party auditors, health officials, human, and also police. So we've had here in Australia over the last couple of years, we've had food recalls, product recalls where the police have been involved. So that's been where in supermarkets we found foreign objects such as pins, nails, needles in such as strawberries and grapes. So police there will get involved in that. Then the second half of that flowchart goes through. So if you're a manufacturer, you need to do this. If you're a retailer, you need to do this. Government authority, you need this. At the end of that, the last two steps in that chain talks about corrective actions. And then down the right-hand side, it gives information on a food recall checklist. And now this checklist is designed to guide only, but it does give you some really good information in what needs to be in your food recall plan, your food recall checklist. So you can download that through the New South Wales Food Authority, or as I said, your local food authority in your local state may have something similar to that. Okay, so what should be in the plan? And as I said, if you are engaged in the wholesale supply, manufacture or importation of food, there's a legal requirement in Australia that you do have a food recall procedure or a food recall plan. Now, your recall plan should begin with a set of objectives. So we need to have a scope and a purpose, and this is going to outline what the procedure is aiming to achieve. And really the intent of this procedure should be to ensure that the product being recalled is removed from sale or removed from shelves or warehouses as soon as possible, so it does not pose a health and safety risk to the consumer. And your recall procedure should provide you with some guidance on what to do if a product is being recalled. So objectives in your food recall plan, they can be as simple as we want to stop any further distribution and sale of the recall product as soon as possible. We want to inform the relevant authorities, consumers, and so on, and then we want to retrieve that product as quickly as possible and then dispose of the product. The other thing that should be in your recall procedure or plan is some information on key personnel and responsibilities. Now, the depth and complexity of the key personnel and responsibilities is really going to be determined by the size of your business. So large food manufacturers, some of them will actually have a recall committee, and everyone on that recall committee is assigned roles and responsibilities, and the makeup of that recall committee is determined by the key personnel. However, in most cases, it is going to involve a number of people from various areas of the business. Now, if you work in a small business, there could only be one or two people who are going to be involved, in a food recall, but still, those people, if it's one or two, still need to be assigned roles and responsibilities. And most important, whether it's a large business or a small business, those people who are assigned roles and responsibilities, you need to ensure that they're able to make and implement decisions, because they're the ones who are going to be on the ground, involved in the recall, involved in the incident. They need to be able to make and implement decisions. So they need to have that authority to be able to do that, because you don't want to have to go back to a general manager or a CEO or someone to actually make it, because the longer it takes you to that decision, then the more chance you have of somebody coming ill from eating that product if it has been contaminated. And those roles and responsibilities, again, they will be determined by the organisation, but you could have one's role is to liaise with customers. So how do I retrieve that product? Another person, their role might strictly be with the talking to the media. So talking to local authorities or government authorities or talking to media officials. But it's important that we do have all those roles identified. The other thing we do need to have is for all those personnel that we do need to contact or notify, we need to make sure that we have their details, and that is clearly spelled out in the procedure. So whether that's the local food authority, a government food authority, distributors, wholesalers, retailers, we need to make sure that we have contact details there so that we can stop the distribution of that food product as quickly as possible and put a plan in place to retrieve that product. Now, the contact details should just be the contact person, their telephone, and either a fax or email details. Importantly, if you supply food to clients overseas or distributors overseas, you need to ensure that you have their details as well. Okay, so you're going to need to recall that product. So you need to make sure that any overseas clients or distributors, you have their details as well. Okay, what else should be in the plan? We need to have in our plan arrangements or procedures on how are we going to retrieve that food. So how we get that food back? Is it going to be just through our delivery drivers, or is it going to be someone from our food recall committee? Whoever you decide who is going to retrieve that food, again, that needs to be clearly articulated in your plan as well. So other things that should be in your plan and part of your recall procedure, and the time that the recall commenced, the name of the companies or the company who are involved, the product type, so the name of the product, and then the nature of the hazard. And normally with recalls, most recalls will start with a batch code or some sort of number that is traced to a production or delivery date. So therefore, it's best to start by ensuring that you have some type of identification number on the packaging or label so that you can trace that incident, and you can trace that quite easily. That's why if you've ever complained about a food product to a supermarket or retailer, they will always ask you, have you kept the packaging? Because that is how they are going to start their investigation. So the final thing on what should be in your plan, you should also have in your plan what level of recall is it. So is it going to just be a trade recall? So do I just need to contact those caterers or wholesalers, or is it going to be a consumer recall? So then do I need to work deeper in the supply chain to ensure that I can recall that product? Also, distribution, I've spoken about that as well, but whether it's local, international, interstate, you need to make sure that you have the network in place, and this again needs to be clearly articulated in your procedure to be able to recall that product either locally, interstate or internationally, and the proposed action, the action that we're going to take, and then how is that product going to be disposed of. Now with this, and I know that it seems like there is a lot of information to go in your plan, and yeah, there is, but it can be done through a simple checklist. So questions down the left-hand side, answers down the right-hand side. So what level of recall is this, trade or is it consumer? It's consumer. Distribution, who do I need to contact? What action am I going to take? How am I going to dispose of the product? That type of information. So it can be fairly simple when we're actually recalling a product, that we actually use a template to do that on. So now that we've gone through and what our plan, and we've worked hard to write the plan up, and we've reviewed the plan, and we think it works. So what we need to do is we need to test our plan. And generally, what we will need to do when we are testing our plan is what we have is a what we call a mock recall. So that is really going to be the best way for prepared food to be tested. So what that is, a mock recall is really just a simulated exercise where we would identify an item to be recalled, and then we would work out how we're going to retrieve that product from the market. Now, with your mock recall, really, the easiest way to think about that might sound a little bit technical or a little bit difficult, but the easiest way to think of a mock recall is no different. It's no different than an emergency procedure or an evacuation plan. So if you have a fire at work and you need to evacuate people, you want to make sure that they are going to be evacuated from the building safely. So we'll test that evacuation plan. Here's the exit doors, here's the assembly areas, here's the sound of the alarm, whatever. You're going to test that plan so that when people leave or need to exit that building, they're going to exit safely and that nobody is hurt in that fire. And your mock recall is no different. Instead of it being a fire, we have a contaminated or a defective product that has gone out into the marketplace. We need to make sure that we get that product back safely before it is consumed by the end user. And so by putting your plan into practice, it gives you the opportunity to rectify any problems before you have a genuine food recall. So you don't want to be testing your plan when you've had a food recall, because that could end poorly. So It is recommended that the business conducts their mock recall on an annual basis, and that includes some sort of traceability. So do that annually, and certainly if you're certified to Codex HACCP or one of those, that will be part of that standard, is that you have a food recall plan in place and that it is tested on an annual basis. Now, your mock recall is going to help you to test your traceability processes as well, because what you're going to be doing is tracking a particular product through its journey in your supply chain. It will also help you with your communication. So you'll have to communicate with consumers, with suppliers, with personnel, or your recall personnel. So it's going to help you with that. It is also going to help you see where the holes in your system are. And then what you need to do is discuss ways of how are you going to control those risks, or how are you going to fix those holes. So this is what we do after the recall. So this is all part of testing your plan. So once you've conducted your recall, you're going to need to sit down with the relevant personnel and go through this exercise, the same you would do if you've had an emergency evacuation. And at this point, we're looking at ways in which the system can be improved. So we'd be asking our questions like, how difficult was it to trace that recall product? Did we get everything back? So everything that we made, did we get it back? Can we account for it? Is there any still out there in the marketplace? Was any consumed? If it was consumed, who consumed it? Do we need to contact any of the local authorities? So really, with your mock recall, you want to try and keep it as simple as possible. So for example, you might say we've made 200 salmon tarts. We needed to recall all of those because there was a foreign object found in them. So through our production schedules and our purchase orders, we will know that 125 tarts went to supplier A, 15 to supplier B, 30 went to supplier C, and 30 to supplier D. So what we need to do now is make sure that we can account for all of those and we can dispose of all of those. The other thing that we need to look at here as part of testing your plan, and we'll go back to our salmon tarts. So we know that we've delivered 200. What we need to confirm is, was there any of the mix left over? So yes, we need to account for that. Or did we make other tarts up and maybe they're frozen and we're going to use them next week? So we need to make sure that we're accounting for those. So our accounting for those products needs to include any leftover mixes or materials or any other products that might have been frozen or we're going to be used at a later date. So from here, we need to ensure that we get the 200 returned, or can't get them returned, then we account for those products. So supplier A, where we sent 125 products to, they might have thrown them all out. So, okay, so we've accounted for that 125, we write that on our form, and now we're only looking or trying to find the other 75. So as I said, part of this, we need to have a look at what works well and what do we need to improve in case we do have a real product recall. Now this brings me into the last part of the presentation, and that process is the one of traceability. So as that first dot point says, traceability is the ability to track any food through all stages of production, processing and distribution, and that includes importation and retail. And traceability should mean that we're able to trace that product one step backwards and one step forward at any point in the supply chain. So we need to know where that product's come from, so our supplier, so tracing that, and also one step forward, so that where have we sent that product to. So for a food processing business, traceability should extend to being able to identify all the sources of food input. So that's raw materials, additives, other ingredients, packaging, those sorts of things. So, and what traceability does is that's going to, if we have a good traceability test, that is going to enable us to put in effective corrective actions, and they're going to be able to be done quickly in case something has gone wrong. So with our traceability system, what that can help us do during a potential food safety issue is that firstly it can help us identify where the product is, but can also help us isolate those products as well. And now just down the bottom of that slide, I do have there that your business may not be tracking the products back to farms, but as a minimum, your traceability should still allow you to identify products that were produced on the day, and some of that might be one step towards where that product has been supplied on the day, and also one step forward, so who have we sent that product to. Now, you may not need to go back to the farms. I know there are some businesses here that do. Some fruit and vegetable processors can actually trace their product to a particular section in a paddock. So your business may not need to go that far, but as I said, as a minimum, we should be going one step forward, one step backwards. Okay, so what's next? What do we need to do now? So periodically, so whether that's annually, 6 monthly, that'll be up to you. We need to review our information to ensure that it's up to date and that all those ingredients that are in those products, we've accurately identified them. And that does include allergens, because commonly that is why products are recalled. We need to ensure that our system is based, and that includes checks to ensure that procedures and documents are not only up to date, but they are relevant. So if you have had processes changed, then it's important that you change your management systems and your procedures and documents as well. And it doesn't matter whether you're a large business or you're a small business, you need to take ownership of the risks. Some business owners really just interest profit, but you need to make sure that you take ownership of the risks. You need to get organised, and you need to put your system in place to manage that risk. And importantly, know what your responsibilities are and ensure that you meet them. So if you have a food recall procedure or a food recall plan, you need to make sure that you have assigned roles and responsibilities to the relevant people, but they know what their responsibilities are. Okay, so just to finish, in summary, so gone through today, we've had a look at our recall procedure. We've had a look at the various types of recalls, so commonly we trade recalls and consumer recalls. We've also had a look at what's in your plan and how you can review and test your current plan. And then once you do that, it's important that you make the necessary changes to that plan, because you don't want to get to a real food recall and find that you have significant gaps in your process. Importantly, never assume that someone else is doing it or someone else has it under control. If you are responsible in your organisation for drill or for that food recall procedure, then you need to make sure that you have that under control and that you are doing it. Okay, so again, just to finish off, these are some of the areas that some of the information that I've used, I obtained. So there are some good websites there, and you may have your own. But just to finish off, I'd just like to say thank you for watching this webinar. Don't forget to purchase your CPD certificate. And certainly if you have any further questions, my contact details at the front of the slide, so feel free to send information. But again, thank you for watching, and I hope that you have got something out of this presentation. Thank you.
And thank you, Daniel McConville, for that excellent analysis of food safety recall procedures. And that concludes this presentation.